People of the world, hello and welcome again to the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News with your hosts Rod and Norm, where our purpose is a simple one. We are Black, unfiltered African American men with no strings attached, giving voice as the most feared, most misunderstood, and most rarely heard from segment of the population on topics of interest to us for education, enlightenment, and entertainment. Remember, you can reach us with your comments, questions, or suggestions. We're at the Brothers Talk on Twitter, the Brothers Talk on Instagram, the Facebook group of the same name. And if you want to go into more detail, you can reach us, thebrotherstalk@gmail.com. And don't forget to tune in each week on Fridays to our weekly podcast, which you can find wherever you find your favorite podcast. As we begin this week with our news segment, we have to talk about a disturbing development on the vaccine front worldwide, that the African nations are lagging far behind their ability to vaccinate their populations, principally because of profit for American and European countries, in that they will not release the patents to them be able to create the formulas for the vaccines in order to administer to their populations. And so this is one of the most racist things that we've ever seen, as we hear currently about all of the deaths that are happening in India, and for a lot of the same reasons, that they're unable to obtain enough vaccines. But what is little being talked about is how the African nations are also in such a state. It's really unfortunate because right now we all recognize that a lot of other kinds of viruses and bacterias, once they reach the African continent, they have a way of mutating in a way that if we are able to find our way to herd immunity, that literally there are going to be pockets where the next variant could come up and become even more deadly and start this chain all over again.
Yes, Rod. And I'm glad you used the term racist because that's exactly what it is. It's a continuation of the colonialism, the genocide of our people. And unfortunately, we have our people in this country that don't recognize that at least we have somewhat access to it. Many of us just won't take it. But on our motherland, they're basically denying millions and millions and billions of people that access.
And it is nothing more than racism because they have no problem in allowing the formula to be shared in European nations. They have no problem in finding opportunities to probably even let it be shared in some of the Asian nations. But when it comes to the African continent in particular, and we know that things like Ebola, where they started in that continent and effectively were able to spread almost worldwide, and so it's just asking for trouble. But the bottom line is that once again, we have individuals in America and in European government who value the dollar more than they do African lives.
On top of that, they want to see those countries weak. They want to see them very vulnerable. And that will simply give the West more access to all of the minerals and diamonds and gold and what have you, the resources of those countries. And that's been the game plan since they basically gained independence anyway.
And you certainly make a good point that you have to wonder about, because in essence, there never is the outcry for the type of genocide that takes place or the type of pandemics that spread across the African countryside until it actually escapes the African continent. And so it seems as though they would just as soon allow for the populations of the African nations to be ravaged by disease and effectively be removed from that mineral rich continent so that they could then once again go in and exploit the opportunity to get the minerals and as you said, the other natural resources.
Yeah, well, that's always the game plan, because if they're not doing that, they're basically starting civil wars or assassinating leaders, anything to keep that continent weak. Gaddafi is the greatest example. That was the staple of the continent, and he was actually going to start a currency for the continent and a banking system. And you see what happened to him.
And there's always been this sort of opportunity that has been taken by the Europeans to transform the history of the world and not acknowledge the true contributions of the African continent. And so much so that even though we realize that all three of the major religions effectively developed in what was known as Northeast Africa until they built the Suez Canal, which separated that portion of the landmass from the rest of the African continent, but it's still known as Northeast Africa, but now they attempt to call it the Middle East. So there certainly is a ongoing current of racist behavior that will continue to be out there. And this is just the latest example. So we have to be aware of this, and we need to start putting pressure on these companies and on these governments to make sure that those who are in the motherland have the same right to vaccine, so that it is a matter of worldwide safety. So we all need to be aware of that, and we all need to do what we can to try to ensure that that doesn't continue. So we'll be back in just a moment with more of the Brothers Talk on M24 News. And we're back on the Brothers Talk on M24 News. In our politics section this week, we want to talk about these plethora of new suppressive voter laws that are being enacted across the country, over 360 of them in all. And most recently, a lot of people have said these were solutions in search of a problem, to which we would like to respond a little differently and say they are solutions in response to a problem. The problem is the diminishing Republican voter base. The problem is the fact that the evangelicals are becoming fewer and fewer as more and more young people are turning away from those churches. And so what these voter laws are attempting to do is to suppress the enormous number of new voters that came out, both Black and other ethnic groups, and trying to tilt the scales back toward the Republicans, even though they realize that they don't have the numbers anymore. So what they're attempting to do is effectively try to find a way to create an improper imbalance.
That's it exactly. I don't know why they call it the new Jim Crow, but the old one's working just fine. It's obvious what they're doing here. And Rod, I mean, you mentioned this, there's not too much we can say in regards to that, but they're not really my problem. Again, my problem is the Democrats who sit on their hands and do nothing while they see this going on time and time again, from the voter ID on down. And even during elections, when they lose states during presidential elections because of this, they still do nothing. Biden's in office. What is he doing? You control the House. What are you doing? They're sitting on their hands doing nothing. They're just as complicit as the Republicans, as far as I'm concerned.
And you couldn't be more right, because this is really low-hanging fruit, except for the fact that you have a Democratic Party who is refusing to call it what it is. And even the media, they ask these questions as if they really don't know the answers. They ask, why are these laws being passed? And the simple answer is racism. That in essence, they are doing everything they can to answer the fact that what they saw in the 2020 elections was a surge in Black and brown voters, particularly in Black voters, that in essence, in this past election, the only group that voted in greater numbers percentage-wise was white males. And so the idea goes on that the states that were tipped, the states where most of these new voter restrictions are in place, are places where, when they say the most diverse voting population, that again is soft selling it. They're really saying where they had the largest Black voter turnout. And so there needs to be something on the Democratic side where they literally ought to have someone from the party, whether it's the party chairman and Jamie Harrison, or whether it's a designated representative who's out there literally every day calling out the racism that it is, because there isn't any other explanation for it. You had the director of Homeland Security, under 45, say it was the most secure election in the nation's history. And yet you have over 360 pieces of new legislation targeting Black voters. targeting the opportunities to dissuade, to discourage, and to undermine their opportunities to vote. But the sad reality is that you can't really just shoot a shotgun into a crowd and think that you're just always going to get the black voters, because what this programs are, and what these new laws are doing is they're actually going to be making it more difficult for a lot of white voters as well.
Ironically, one of the first things Trump did in office was to commission a report regarding voter fraud. And his own report basically came back and said there isn't any. But he still used that tactic to explain his loss in the 2020 election. Now, what are we going to do about it? We're going to take that momentum and pass these voter fraud laws to handicap minorities, and again, give the white voters in those red states an opportunity to come back, especially like Georgia and Texas, which are teetering.
And nobody really wants to, again, to just come out and say what it is, because they realize that it was the big lie. And all of these Republicans who have done an about face, who at one point, whether it was Chris Christie or Kevin McCarthy or Mitch McConnell, all these folks who basically said at one point that they were done with 45, have now suddenly found it in their best interest, not because they believe in him, but because they understand what he supports in the support that he gets from white nationalists and white supremacists. And that's the base that they're trying to galvanize, which is just one more reason why we need people to come out and call it what it really is. Don't tap dance around it and just say voter suppression or voter disenfranchisement, but call it racism. That in essence, what they are doing in no uncertain terms is doing their best to turn back the clock on voting rights, which too many people bled and died for, and we should not be willing to sit by and let it happen again. We'll be back in just a moment again with the Brothers Talk on M24 News. And we're back on the Brothers Talk on M24 News. In our sports segment this week, we need to talk about the double standard there is between the white coaches and between those of other ethnic groups, because we see far too often that teams are willing to leapfrog out of their own professional ranks and go to the college ranks to pull up white coaches, but we don't see the same thing happening when it comes to black coaches. And what that really means, unfortunately, is that qualified black coaches get passed over for opportunities when they bring up the next great white hope. Examples are Brad Stevens with the Boston Celtics in the NBA, and Cliff Kingsbury with the Arizona Cardinals in the NFL, who actually came up and replaced the black coach who only had 1 year as the head coach. Most recently, you have Urban Meyer with the Jacksonville Jaguars, who had been out of football, out of college football for a number of years, and now gets the position of coach and general manager for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And it just goes to show you that the process goes on when you've got highly qualified assistants. You have Eric Bieniemy with the former Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, who made it again to the Super Bowl. And you have Andy Reid, his coach, who was another of those who basically got a job without really having to interview for it. But he's trying to champion Eric Bieniemy and saying that this guy really should be a head coach in the NFL. So he knows what kind of talent he has. He knows how much he's relied on this player, this former player and coach, but he can't even get an interview. But you have guys who are getting jobs when Cliff Kingsbury was fired at Texas Tech. And next thing you know, he's the new head coach for the Arizona Cardinals.
Well, Rod, the Al Campanis theory is still with us, because the white man is not going to give us any positions when he cannot dominate the game itself. If he did, where are white people going to work? Where are they going to be? And basically, that's what you're seeing. And what they're going to make sure they do is they're going to allow us to have maybe one or two, but that's it in any of those kind of positions. And I want to talk about basketball again, because literally on the Nets, they brought back a player who literally was coaching soccer at that time. Now, with all the players and former players who want to be coaches and what have you, they wind up having to go to coach college basketball because they have no shot in the NBA.
And let me make a correction. Steve Nash wasn't coaching soccer. He was a girls soccer commentator. So he had zero coaching experience when he got the job at the Nets. But let's also go back and talk a little bit about Urban Meyer being with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So as we said, Urban Meyer had been out of football for various health reasons. He left Utah, he left Florida, he left Ohio State. And granted, he was a successful college coach, but he's already had a number of significant missteps, according to most authorities. The first was when he hired a racist strength coach who he later fired. But the idea is like it was no secret why this strength coach had been fired in the first place for racist comments. And yet Urban Meyer thought he could hire this guy. And when it was brought out that the people knew about it and the players heard about it, then he quickly backtracked and fired him. But his latest action is to sign Tim Tebow. Tim Tebow is a 33-year-old, washed out, never was quarterback in the NFL. And now he's attempting to switch to the position of tight end at 33 years old. So not only is that a slap in the face to every person who's been playing tight end, especially those coming out of college and those who are already in the NFL, but once again, you find that a lot of these players, again, are Black tight ends. And so they're not getting that opportunity for a guy who, for whatever reason, Urban Meyer was his coach at Florida, but that was literally over 10 years ago. And Tim Tebow gets chance after chance to prove that he's not an NFL player. And so I ask you to show me again the Black players who get that same kind of opportunity.
The privilege of whiteness strikes again. Now, we see Tebow, again, as you just mentioned, getting a second shot. But let's turn to Cap. Cap's not getting another shot. And I had to have a discussion earlier with someone who said, well, Cap didn't show up for his tryouts. And I asked this same person, did Tebow sign the same waiver that Cap did? Or what Cap was offered, I should say.
And so this is what you have, is this imbalance in the coaching ranks. And just like when we talk about the Toronto Raptors in the NBA, and we wonder why teams keep rushing to hire the assistants of Nick Nurse, when basically after Kawhi Leonard was there and won that NBA championship for them, the Toronto Raptors have barely scratched the playoffs, and this year in danger of not even making it. But you have teams continuing to say, we want to hire from the Nick Nurse coaching tree. And so you're asking yourself, like, why? What have they done? What did Nick Nurse ever do to show you that he was an effective coach in the NBA? Because the teams haven't done a thing since Kawhi Leonard left. Once again, we'll be back with you again on the Brothers Talk on M24 News, so please stay tuned. In our culture and entertainment segment this week, there's an interesting development that, Norm, you came up with. You found that Essence Magazine, which is one of the long-held staples of culture in the Black community, along with Ebony and Jet Magazine, now has a white editor. And so tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, Rod, I tried to stay away from it when I found out about it because my blood pressure is pretty bad. The issue is, she's done some consulting with with Essence before and what have you. But my issue, it really is, where are the sisters or Black women who are editors? Where are they going to work? What white magazines are going to offer them this kind of position? That's just not going to happen. This is just like sports and every other facet of American life, where Black people are not offered those types of positions. And if a Black magazine gives that position to a white woman, where are they going to go?
Yeah, I think this is worse, really, because as I mentioned, you've got certain staples that have always been a part of the Black community. And so Essence has always been a flag bearer for Black fashion, you know, the just like Ebony magazine with the fashion fair, modeling shows and cosmetics and so forth. And they've just been a go-to place for Black style and beauty. And so the notion that you're suddenly having a white person in charge of that really just seems like such a cop out, such a surrender, really just selling out to, I don't know what it is she brings to the page, but effectively, there isn't anything that I understand. You know, we talked just on one of our recent shows about why we allow ourselves to be dictated to on the standards of beauty and culture by Europeans, in that too many of our, especially our stars and our media personalities have acquiesced and allow themselves to be Europeanized in their makeup and in their hair. And so this is just another really troubling development, at least from my perspective, as to why would any Black, self-respecting Black woman allow herself to feel like she was going to give herself over to get her fashion and beauty advice from a white woman.
Yes, and I just want to clarify, she is the fashion editor, but not that it really matters. But what does this tell to say to young Black women in this country who aspire to be for that position? You know, and that's what I have to. There's just a total tone deafness in that organization. That's obvious. What is their mission statement? What is it?
Yeah, you certainly have to wonder about that out loud, because it really just seems to just belie the description of what you would expect that position to be about, because you would think one of the requirements for the job would be to have some expertise in Black cosmetics, in Black style, in Black standards of beauty. And this really could not offer those kind, it couldn't put anything down that would be anything other than something that was made up, because you can't really turn around and tell me that when it comes to things like Black skin care and Black hairstyles, that a person who has zero experience with understanding what that is about. Because unlike most other areas, even if it were things like just like fashion, well, that's purely subjective, and if someone wants to talk about that. But as I've always understood Essence, a big portion of it has to do with things like skincare and makeup and whole body type of information that talks about the African American experience. And so how you would turn that over to a white person is just beyond me.
What's really funny here, usually like in Hollywood, you have white executives and white directors and producers telling Black actors how to be Black on screen. And here we have our own, in our own house, we have an opportunity to define our Blackness, our culture. And what do? We turn it over to the same people.
Yeah, that just doesn't seem to pass the smell test. And we've known for many years that there have been Blacks who have thought that for whatever reason, the reason they can be validated or verified is if they get white approval. And so this just really feels wrong on that level, that in essence, that here Essence is effectively turning over the reins to a white person, as though that somehow is going to give them additional credibility. But I like your comment, Norm, that what does it say to the young Black girls coming up and those who are reading Essence and thinking that they could one day become the editor if once again another opportunity that should have been theirs is now in the hands of a white person, and who's to say that the next person who comes in won't be another white person. So that's our take. And we'll be back in a moment again for the Brothers Talk. Please stay tuned on M24 News. And we're back on the Brothers Talk on M24 News. In our education segment this week, we want to talk about the potential of some of our best and brightest students going to HBCUs. You know, we have in the past been very strident in encouraging some of the top athletes, Black athletes, to go to HBCUs. And we've actually seen a trend in that direction where we're seeing a number of high profile ex NFL coaches and ex NBA players go to coach at HBCUs and thereby attract some of the top flight talent, Black talent, to those colleges and universities. And of course, we always knew that if indeed these athletes went to these programs, then the money as well as the television cameras are going to follow them, because that's just the nature of sports, that you want to see the best. And so having coaches like Eddie George and like Deion Sanders leads those programs to get a lot more airtime for their programs, and thereby a lot of more young Black athletes deciding they want to go and play for those coaches. But what we sort of inadvertently missed is the idea that why not also encourage more of our top Black students to go to HBCUs? Because there are some wonderful professors there who are doing great work. But unfortunately, in a lot of too many instances, we've allowed HBCUs, other than like the top colleges amongst that brand. And the reason they are considered the top colleges amongst that brand is because of the caliber of students that they attract. And far too often, the others are seen as the last respite of those who did not get into other colleges, and so they go to HBCUs, when there's always been quality education there. Some of our best leaders have come out of those colleges. And so we want to do our best to encourage some of our better students, those who have the opportunity to go to a Yale or a Harvard or a Brown or a Princeton, to turn their attention to an HBCU and see yourself as making the same kind of investment in your future and the future of those colleges as these athletes.
Definitely, Rod. And it's just a part about building community. By going to an HBCU, you really have an opportunity to be an example to other students who come behind you, especially people who wouldn't even think about going. If you go and succeed, what you're going to do regardless of where you go, if you go, you'll be the example for the younger people, and then you will be opportunity to show them the campus and to give them something that they don't have now. We don't have that pull to our own universities, and you will strengthen those universities as well. Just as much as the athletics will be strengthened by the athletes going, the university will be strengthened by you going.
And so the other side of that is that you then become the real big fish in the pond, because going to a Harvard or Yale, you're amongst a lot of other very high achieving students. And so oftentimes some of our best and brightest get swallowed up and spit out by those institutions, because they are no longer the smartest kid in the room. They are just amongst the other kids. And oftentimes that's a very psychological issue, to go from being the top person in your class to suddenly struggling for attention. Well, if you go to an HBCU, you probably are still going to be one of those who are going to be trolling along at the highest level. And that's a good thing for your self-esteem. And by being at those colleges, you will help them also to attract some of the best monies that can come in, because a lot of these foundations and a lot of these corporate interests would like to support the institutions that have the higher academic levels. And so we've seen in a lot of instances that even today, even though there are certainly a number of really qualified students who go to these colleges because they do well in things like debate competitions and science competitions. So it's not as though you're really sacrificing anything. You can go there and matriculate, and at the end of the day, if you do well and you go to a good college, then your future is still going to be bright.
And by having a strong, bright alumni, you will also help with the endowment, which many of the universities are lacking, because most of the students just really are not top flight, that would go to a Harvard or Yale. They're not choosing the HBCU. So having the top students there would help all the way around.
So it's just another one of these areas where we want to be focused on how do we go about reclaiming who we are and what we are, as we have always been able to succeed in spite of the odds. But the truth of the matter is, in today's education marketplace, you can get a great education at an HBCU, not have a lot of that college debt hanging over your head. And in essence, you'll be competing for the same kinds of jobs as if you came out of those Ivy League schools. And we know what a cutthroat environment that is. So let's turn the tables and make sure that there are a number of Black Ivy League schools as well. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment with more of the Brothers Talk on M24 News. And we're back on the Brothers Talk on M24 News. And in our relationship segment this week, we want to talk about some of these beefs that happen in professional sports and as well as in entertainment in general. And particularly our take on what happens when the beef starts to expand out and the spouses or the significant others get involved. To me, I think it's just one of those situations where it's got to be about stay in your lane, because we've seen often, and we're not just going to really name names per se, but certainly enough of you have seen that whenever you have these beefs come up and you get the spouses who start tweeting and start going on Instagram to get involved in the midst of the process, it's like, well, why? You know, in essence, beefing is a part of professional sports and even a part of entertainment to some degree. And so when you are this other person on the outside, it really makes the individual who is actually in the beef look much weaker by connection. I don't know why they think that they need, like, hey, I need my ride or die chick or my ride or die dude to jump into the mix of it. But it really just, to me, seems like such a weak premise that you think that you need to jump into the middle.
Yeah, Rod. And unfortunately, social media has given everybody a platform. And you see today, it's not even just significant others. You see brothers, sisters, mothers. I mean, everybody in the family will now have a voice regarding your situation. And unfortunately, you can't always control the people around you in regards to, you know, your beefs. They want to defend you, they love you, and they're going to go after this person. And you said it, it makes you look weak when your wife or girlfriend or brother is stepping up defending you. You're a gladiator. You've got to defend yourself in that ring and every ring.
You know, and I didn't think about that aspect of Norm. That's a really good point, because you absolutely do see where mothers and cousins and brothers and sisters decide that they need to weigh in on it as well. And so what it really reminds me of is, like, you know, when kids would have some of their beefs out in the streets, you know, and granted, we're talking about a different day and age because you don't have these kind of scraps anymore. But when you would have that, and all of a sudden all the other family members would come out and jump the one kid, and it just never, you know, never reflected well on that kid, because it looked like, wow, you're so weak, you had to have your mama come out and help you fight because you couldn't do anything on your own, or your big brother had to jump into it. And so, you know, it just really punked you having a reputation, because it looked like, you know, you had no ability to stand up for yourself. And so I think what we've got is the modern day piling on by the family members, which says that you weren't man or woman enough to stand up for yourself, that you need these other people. And from my perspective, it's like, I think that's on the individual, because I'd be quick to go back and say, like, no, you know, to my wife or daughter or anybody else who was trying to jump into the mix of it, is like, no, this is my business and this is what I do. I'll take care of this. And while I understand your need to feel like you want to jump in and protect, that's just not the way we roll.
You know, since we weren't going to mention names, I'm just going to say we have a father of 2 NBA players who's taken that to the 10th hour, and the media loving it loving the ratings has given him a platform well beyond social media. He's on all the shows, what have you. And I hate to think how his children really feel about him doing that and putting them out there like that.
Well, like I said, we're not mentioning names, but interestingly enough, I know exactly who you're referring to. And one of his sons basically cut loose from him and said, like, I don't want you managing me anymore. And I think it's probably for that very reason. He realized the amount of negative publicity that he was getting was probably cutting off some opportunities for him, because there were folks who literally said, we don't want to have anything to do with them because we don't want to have to deal with the father.
Well, I can't blame him. I mean, you're going to catch all the heat. The father's not responsible for anything. The player is. Your teammates, your organization, your coaches, everyone is like really looking at you because your father is putting the pressure on them.
And from one side of it, I mean, I certainly understood as a father when he was protecting his kids when they were coming up and making sure that they weren't being taken advantage of. But when they become grown men, then that's when you have to step back. I mean, I don't have any problem with any parent who's out there making sure that they defend their kids from any kind of blowback or any attacks in the press and whatnot. But there does come a time when you literally, as they say, you got to cut the cord, cut the apron strings, and let that kid become a man or a woman.
Yeah, unfortunately, the press just has a field day with this. They just eat it up. And again, it all falls on that young man.
So it's just a situation where you really don't expect anyone to understand or to make the point to their family members and to their friends to say, like, you know what, I got this. And so I'll take care of it. This is my business and you just need to stay put. So, and you please stay tuned with us on the Brothers Talk Show on M24 News. We'll be back in just a moment. And we're back on the Brothers Talk on M24 News. And in our Black on Black Love section for this week, we want to talk about a process that really does help to focus on our mission of relaunching Black Wall Street nationwide, doing it community by community, one household at a time. And Norm, you've got a really interesting example.
Yes, Ron. My local, in my city, our local community chest has teamed with other organizations and they put together a program called the Dinner Project. And what that is they hand out vouchers to needy people, to seniors, what have you, for a free dinner at any local Black restaurant. And the beauty in this is they choose a restaurant every month. So literally all the restaurants participate, and for every voucher that's turned into the restaurant, they get paid. So basically they're bringing them customers, they're feeding the community, and they're keeping people employed during this pandemic. It's a win-win-win for everyone, and it's an opportunity to get involved and share with everyone.
What an outstanding way for Black businesses to get some support by the larger community, to be exposed to others who are certainly can benefit from these vouchers. So if this is the first time you're hearing about this program, we hope that you can potentially find a way to launch something similar in your communities. Wherever there are Black businesses, it doesn't need to be just restaurants. Certainly there are other Black products and services that could benefit as well. So we want to encourage you to take a look at these kinds of programs and figure out how they can go about helping to keep Black businesses afloat in your particular neighborhood. That's how we go about relaunching Black Wall Street, one household at a time. If each of us does our part, then in essence, we can indeed take control of our communities from a socioeconomic standpoint. So that's it again for the Brothers Talk. We thank you again for tuning in. Remember, you can reach us at The Brothers Talk on Twitter, The Brothers Talk on Instagram, the Facebook group of the same name. And if you want to go long form with show ideas and suggestions and comments, you can reach us, thebrotherstalk@gmail.com. And once again, please don't forget to check out our weekly podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. It's the Brothers Talk. So until next time, please be blessed and remember that we'll never take you or your time for granted. So thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you next time on the Brothers Talk on M24 News.